Hi, friends. There's a lot of research going on in the world of fungi. A lot of innovation, a lot of advancement in our understanding of mushrooms. I try to keep on top of it, and I want to talk with you about a few of the interesting studies I've seen recently. This current batch is interesting to me for a variety of reasons that we'll get into. I'm going to try to keep it pretty short and informative, and I've included for each one of the studies a QR code that if you point your camera at it, it'll take you to the study I'm referencing in case you want to look into it further. But with that, let's get into it. All right, so stick around for nightlight mushrooms, but let's start out with the review on mushroom mycelial-based products and their production and process from upstream to downstream. This is a review article from Bioresources and Bioprocessing Journal. A review article is just like it sounds like. It's an article where they review a bunch of other studies. So basically, it's consolidating a lot of information. And this is a cool one. We've made paper from mushrooms, and we've actually got a video up about how to make paper from mushrooms. This picture is a project my son did for a science fair project of a bunch of different mushroom papers. But there's a lot of other stuff that's being done with mushroom technology too. And specifically, things they mention in this paper are packaging materials, construction materials, textiles like faux leather, mycoprotein food, which is meat substitutes grown from basically soil fungi. So to be clear, it's not actually coming from mushrooms. This is not processed mushrooms. It's these filamentous fungi that live in the soil that have been isolated. They're grown in a bioreactor, and they get this nice filamentous form that mimics meat, so they have a good texture, similar to meat. Other technologies mentioned in this paper: medicines, cosmetics, electronics, using mushrooms or other fungi for environmental remediation. There's a lot of different innovations out there. It's really cool to read about it. I definitely recommend you checking out this review article. And one of the great things about a review article like this is getting into the source material at the back where they have their references, and they will reference them throughout the paper, but they've got the full citations at the back. And you can look up these different reference materials yourself and dig in deeper. Definitely recommend checking this out. Next up is growth and yield characteristics of 3 species of oyster mushroom treated with lime. This is from the International Journal of Agriculture, Environment, and Biotechnology. Then the authors are from Nigeria, Namibia, and Malaysia. And I want to mention here that the lime that they're referring to is not the fruit lime. It is lime that comes mainly from limestone. It's a calcium oxide. So this is a topic that should be interesting to mushroom growers. And I just want to take a minute to plug our product. What we do is make do-it-yourself home mushroom growing kits for people that want to grow at home. They're super easy, low price, much different than anything else you'll find on the market, and well worth it. So check that out if you'd like. Back to the business at hand. But I specifically want to show you some things about this study that relate to how to actually read a scientific study and make sense of the results. On this data table, they show the different treatments of lime from 0 grams up to 15 grams. And then across the top, they show different parameters that they're measuring at those different treatment levels. I want to focus in on just the fresh weight part, which in table 2, you can see the different fresh weights for the different treatments of the 3 different species they looked at. And then in table 1, you can see the analysis of whether there's a significant difference And what they show is that there is no significant difference in the fresh weight between the different treatments for the different species. And that's interesting to look at, that table too, and see the numbers. And when you just look at them, it certainly looks like there's quite a bit of difference between the different treatments with how much lime they got. So this brings up the idea of, if there's that much difference showing up on the table, why is it not statistically different? And the reason is that when you look at statistical difference, you're taking into account both the sample size and how big of a range there is in those samples. If you've got a low number of samples and there's a lot of variation between those samples, it's going to be really hard to make a judgment about whether there's really a difference or it's just that you happen to take a small sample and happened to catch some of the outliers. So that's what you're seeing here. And to further clarify the science of this doesn't mean that there is no benefit to adding lime to your growing substrate. It means that this study of these 3 species using this specific substrate mix didn't show a statistical difference. So this just adds to the body of scientific work. Next up is mushroom farming for youth empowerment, a high-value crop with minimal land requirements. This is a paper in Shod Prabandham, Journal of Management Studies. The authors are from Nigeria and India, and I don't have a ton to say about this one except that I love seeing this kind of thing. It corresponds with our core values here at the Fungal Network. Mushrooms throughout the world are used as a way of empowering people. And here in the United States, they tend to be found at specialty markets or at farmers markets, typically being purchased by people with a lot of disposable income. But around the world, mushrooms are really seen as a way to empower people. Even here in the United States, we have plenty of people who are in need of both income and high quality food. So I'm just leaving this paper there. I recommend you take a look at it, but I don't have a lot to say specifically on it. Next up is enhancing environmental decontamination and sustainable production through synergistic and complementary interactions of actinobacteria and fungi. And this one is in the journal Halion. This is another review paper as opposed to a scientific study. And I included this paper because it is relating to something that's happening sort of throughout the world of biology right now, which is a recognition that species don't live in isolation. They really depend on relationships, and those relationships in great part define them. So there's a lot of talk now, for example, with people about our gut microbes and how important they are to our health, and a recognition that we really depend on all these other species that live inside of us and are part of us. We've known for a long time that lichens, for example, form these lifelong partnerships between fungi and generally algae. But we're starting to recognize more that other things too are dependent on those relationships. So on one level, I find this really personally gratifying to feel like my life exists in the context of other interconnected lives. But on a scientific level, and dealing specifically with fungi, if we want them to do things, if we want to harness the power of what they do naturally, then we should be looking at how they naturally interact with the rest of their environment. The other interesting thing specific to the topic of this paper, I think it's interesting anyway, is these actinobacteria that it's talking about. The group used to be called Actinomyces. But these actinobacteria live in the soil and they produce these long filaments that are called hyphae, just like the filaments that fungi produce are called hyphae. And then the other interesting thing about actinobacteria is that they're very important to us for medicinal reasons. Over 2/3 of the antibiotics that are in use come from actinobacteria, and especially the genus Streptomyces is where we get streptomycin, tetracycline, and other antibiotics. So it's just something interesting to know about the actinobacteria. And finally, I want to end up with this paper, Ethnomycology of Wild Edible Mushrooms by the Bunggu tribe in West Sulawesi, Indonesia. And this is in the International Journal of Design and Nature and Ecodynamics. And this is a really cool one in the tradition of the great old explorer biologists like Charles Darwin, our own Chuck D, basically describing nature and getting that information out there. And in this case, they're describing how this very remote tribe uses mushrooms. And so this was kind of cool because it got me to look more at Indonesia, which I frankly don't know a lot about, except that I like a lot of coffee that comes from there. But Indonesia has over 17,000 islands. There's over 280 million people in Indonesia. It's the fourth most populous country on Earth. There's hundreds of distinct ethnicities and languages. Their motto translates to unity in diversity. So celebrating diversity sounds pretty good to me. But with over 17,000 islands, there's some really remote places with a lot of people that are living the way they did probably thousands of years ago. So for this paper, the authors spent about 5 months living with the Bunggu people to learn how they use mushrooms so that they could report on it. And the results are really cool and really fire the imagination, which I really like. I'm going to show you a couple things. Table 1 in the paper shows these different varieties of mushrooms, and they report on 14 different varieties of mushrooms, and they give the vernacular name, the name that the people there call it, as well as the species nomenclature, the way it's usually reported in scientific literature, the family of mushrooms, the substrate that it grows on, the parts that they use, and then importantly, how they use it. And so a really cool one to see right off the bat here is this one that liquid is squeezed from the fruit body used as hair wash and shampoo or hair tonic. That's kind of interesting. But even more interesting to me, this one that's used as a food source. It appears 14 days after heavy rain accompanied by thunder and lightning and lots of moths flying, and it cannot be consumed by orphans. It's a taboo. It just seems particularly sad to me that orphaned people in this tribe, when everybody else is eating this mushroom, they won't let them eat it. But the other really cool one here, if you look down at number 8 there, it's a Mycena species. It says it's used as a lighting tool when walking in the garden or forest at night. I don't know, that really fires off my imagination. I would love to be able to line my walkways with a mushroom that really lit up enough that people could report that I used it as a lighting tool. I think that's awesome. Well, friends, that's all I've got for you today. I would encourage you to stay curious. There's a big, cool world out there, so let's keep exploring it.